our international news review segment. There is much to talk about. I know Steve Okun is right here, ready and waiting for us.
International News Review.
Welcome to Steve Okun to our International News Review, and also welcoming a very special guest today, Dr. Kian Ming, Member of Parliament in Malaysia and a member of the Pakatan Harapan wing of the opposition. Great to have you both with us today.
Good morning, Glenn. Good morning, Neil.
Morning, guys.
Good morning, Dr. Ong. First and foremost, how's everything in Malaysia today? You're in KL, correct?
Yeah, I'm KL. I'm also the former Deputy Minister of International Trade and Industry. So I'm going to be sharing some insights based on my past experience. Thanks for having us. Thanks for having me. I don't know whether Steve mentioned, I used to live and study in Singapore.
So Raffles Institution, right? Raffles.
Yeah, it's like not a very well-known neighborhood school, I hear. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, literally about 300 meters from where we're sitting right now is RI. So welcome back virtually to your part of town here. And thanks so much for being with us. We're going to start off with a COVID update for Southeast Asia. And Steve, let's bring it to you. How are we looking? We just found out our quarantine here in Singapore is going down to 2 weeks from 3 weeks. That's good news. Are we seeing bright silver linings to this cloud?
Well, I mean, I think that one of the words the ministers used here to describe the situation is that we're all battle weary, right? After facing COVID for so long, and you're in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, back to phase 2, heightened alert, phase 2 heightened alert part 2. And so I think there seems to be a growing sense that maybe we can kind of sort of see a light at the end of the tunnel, but there is still a lot of frustration. I would say certainly in particular in the foreign business community, the expat business community, the inability for employment pass holders to travel back to Singapore if they were going to go to the United States or the EU or basically just about anywhere in the world. So a little bit better, but there's still a ways to go, I think, in addressing COVID from an expat and business community perspective, in addition to what needs to be done for the entire population when it comes to vaccines and inoculations.
Dr. Ong, I was speaking to a friend of mine yesterday. He's a Malaysian journalist up in KL, and he was elaborating more on what Steve was saying, a real sense of lethargy, of frustration, that this concept of lockdown never seems to be ending. That seems to be the mindset in Malaysia. The names change, the periods change, but it just seems like this period of lockdown in Malaysia just seems to be omnipresent. What is the mood over there? What's the latest?
It's pretty dire. I mean, we have people literally jumping off buildings, because they don't see any hope. They've lost their businesses. They don't see any way out of it. Of course, the situation is pretty dire. The number of cases have come down, but they're still hovering around 4,000 to 5,000 cases a day. We have more than 50 people dying every day. We've surpassed the number of deaths, total deaths, compared to China, right? So it is pretty dire. The lockdown will likely be extended for another 2 weeks. But on my part, I do highlight these issues in Parliament. Not in Parliament, but hopefully we'll highlight it in Parliament when it finally convenes again. But I'm also trying to take some proactive steps. For example, I'm offering my services pro bono as a former management consultant to small businesses across the country who have been affected, trying to give them tips on how to survive and trying to help them out. And at the same time, I'm trying to set up these vaccination centers in my own constituency so we can increase the number of vaccinations. So, rather than to see things really from such a bleak point, let's work together to build back the country better. And I think this can apply to other countries in ASEAN as well, including Singapore.
Yeah, we're talking with Steve Okun, Senior Advisor at McClarty Associates, and Dr. Kian Ming, Member of Parliament and member of the Pakatan Harapan in Malaysia. And Dr. Ong, great start off, I think, there by Neil and asking, what the situation is there. But we have seen various plans by the ruling party there now to deal with this. What are they missing? Or is it just that the country is so large and porous that it is hard to get this under control? I was talking with a friend yesterday in KL who was blaming the foreign workers who are not tested, who are not anyway, a very what I thought was a very
not an uncommon response around the world.
A very common
sadly.
response. But what is the government, from your perspective in KL and Putrajaya, missing here? What should be done differently?
I don't think they're seeing the big picture in terms of you employing this buzzword, this slogan of whole of society, all of government approach, and we really do need that. We have ministers that are bickering with each other publicly in Malaysia. The Prime Minister not taking a very strong leadership position. He'll come out with an announcement that there's going to be a lockdown, and then he expects the SOPs to be done by his ministers separately over the next couple of days, and then they don't coordinate with one another. We joke, they should share some of this information over WhatsApp so that at least there's some coordination, right? And I think some of these matters to do with lashing out the foreign workers is to do with the lack of information on the ground, the lack of coordinated strategy looking forward. I think this is very disappointing.
Steve, you touched on something just now that I found very interesting, this sense of frustration on the ground. You hear it in Dr. Ong's words in Malaysia. We're certainly feeling it in Singapore. And when you contrast it with countries in the West, like the US, like parts of Europe, like the UK, just to use that example, has far greater numbers than Dr. Ong just mentioned, both in terms of cases, and the deaths are almost about the same, 20, 30 per day. No one's playing down those numbers. One death is a terrible death. But are we reaching some sort of tipping point here where we have to either learn to live with COVID and open up slightly, or have some form of lockdown for an indeterminate future?
No, I think that's the question, Neil. What is your goal as a government? What is your goal as a society? Is it to save as many lives as you possibly can, or is it to have some type of balance? Because if you go so far on saving lives from a health perspective, but are you harming lives from a psychological perspective? And what's going to happen in terms of employment and people's livelihoods and people's ability to get education? This is not easy. You have to have this balance. And you see now the United States is very publicly saying all of the deaths happening in the US right now from COVID are those who are unvaccinated. Right. And you can get a vaccine in the United States if you want right now. So now the government seems to be, somewhat saying, hey, it's up to you. We're going to open up. We're going to do more and more. And if you aren't going to go along, you're going to pay the consequences as an individual. That's an interesting shift.
Yeah. And Dr. Ong, just to follow up on that, what is the vaccination process like right now in Malaysia? Where are you at with vaccinations?
We are about at 15% of the population, targeted population, but I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll be able to get up to 60% by the end of August, because we have a huge bunch of vaccines coming in from China, as well as from the US and Europe in the next 2 months. So I'm cautiously optimistic that will allow the economy to open up as well.
Yeah, we could talk about COVID and this part of the world literally for the next 4 or 5 days, but let's move on to something. Since we do have Dr. Ong on it, I'd love to get some input on this. And Steve, there was a very interesting article in Politico this week entitled "The Asia-Size Hole in Biden's Trade Agenda," and including some strong remarks from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the senior vice president for Asia. It said there, one of the leading line was President Joe Biden is trying to lead on Asia without any firm plan to go to Asia this year. What have the messages been from Asia, for Asia, from the White House, and where does Biden need to go next?
I'm going to defer to Dr. Ong actually on this one I want to hear his perspective of somebody in Malaysia government, and then I'll give the U.S. response.
Yeah. Okay. So speaking on ASEAN, one of the things that I did recently was to look at all the holes in the ambassadorial appointments in ASEAN, and just to let you know, Singapore obviously has had a U.S. ambassador for, I think, the better part of 3 or 4 years. Yeah,
since Kirk Wagner left, actually almost 5 years now.
Wow. Yes, yeah. And this is a key ally for the U.S. In terms of Singapore, and then of course importantly ASEAN. there's no ambassador to ASEAN. And this is very important because there were some incursions by the Chinese military into Malaysian airspace in the context of Southeast Asia, the South China Sea. And this would have been the perfect opportunity for a US ambassador in ASEAN to be able to voice out concerns on behalf of the Biden administration. We don't have an ambassador in Thailand. We don't have an ambassador in Brunei. And the ambassador in Vietnam has left. The new one has been appointed, but I don't think he's gone over yet to Vietnam, right? So this comes in the larger context of an Economist article saying that Biden wants to reach out, but he doesn't have his ambassadors in place in other key places like the UK and Japan as well. So I'm sure Steve will be able to talk more about the ambassadorial appointments. But for me, when this kind of thing happens, there's really sort of like a disconnect between what the Biden administration wants to tell to us and implement in concrete strategies, and then what's happening on the ground here in terms of hearing the voice of the ambassadors, in different parts of ASEAN.
Dr. Ong, though, if I can just jump in on there, though, despite the fact that there are not ambassadors, there are excellent foreign service representatives, the deputy chief of mission and all of the State Department folks for the East Asia desk. I mean, Stephanie Siptak Ramnath, for example, is one of those people in Washington, D.C., the former DCM here in Singapore. There are a lot of really good and very, very capable people with their hands on that wheel in terms of dealing with Asia issues. It is true there isn't the official title of ambassador sitting, but
Sure.
there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes, is there not?
I do not deny that, and there's a lot of good work going on behind the scenes, even in Malaysia. But for us in the political circle, what we want to look at is the larger narrative that's being portrayed by DC. And to my knowledge, President Biden has not made any speech focusing on Southeast Asia. His Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, has not, I think, as far as I know, made any speech focusing on Southeast Asia. In fact, he was supposed to have a call with all the foreign ministers of ASEAN a couple of weeks back, and he was flying from, I think, Ireland to the Middle East, and the call was botched. It never happened because of technical reasons, and this was reported by the Straits Times. And, imagine that kind of feeling. You have 10 foreign ministers there sitting, waiting to listen to Secretary Blinken, and, the call doesn't happen, and you can't blame Huawei on this.
Yeah.
So, Steve, 650 million people, a combined gross domestic product of 2.8 trillion. Why isn't President Biden talking to these guys?
We'll start at the micro level and go up to the macro level. First, in terms of appointing ambassadors. Now, look, I worked in the White House counsel's office a long time ago doing vetting of presidential appointees, and back then I had a library card for the Library of Congress, and then we would go and we would look up anything that's been written about or by, a nominee. Now, if you look today, how much information is out there? You have to look at everything before you can appoint somebody. Now, look, on this group of 4 people, I've had 1.9 thousand tweets. Glenn, you've had 2.9 thousand tweets. Neil, you've had 43.9 thousand tweets, and Dr. Ong's had almost 82,000 tweets. If we nominate somebody like Dr. Ong to be ambassador, somebody's got to read those 82,000 tweets. You got to know what he has said about everything before you can put him forward to be the representative of the United States. It just takes longer now. Now, President Obama nominated David Edelman in November of 2009. He had his hearing, and he actually got here in April of 2010. So we got plenty of time using the on the Obama schedule to get an ambassador here. We'd all like one faster. But you have to look at the difficulty, and you have to look at the priorities. And I think the second thing, we have to remember what a mess the United States was when President Biden inherited it. When he came into office, it was the worst healthcare crisis since the 1910s, the worst economic crisis since the 1920s, the worst civil unrest since the 1960s. And our constitutional democracy was at its greatest peril since 1865. We have to address that first. We have to build back better as the United States. And then you got to repair all those alliances that Donald Trump damaged with Japan, with Korea, with NATO, with the EU. We'd love more of a focus on ASEAN. The business community wants to see more of a focus on ASEAN. It is a very important place, but we got to look at it in context.
Yeah, absolutely.
On Southeast Asia, I think President President Trump did not damage relations in Southeast Asia because he never had any.
I'm just slightly scared that Steve, a former White House man, has gone through all my tweets.
Well, frankly, I'm a little bit disappointed because I had more tweets. I was more popular. I had more likes than he mentioned. So I'm feeling kind of bad about that, but that's just me. And I will just mention, too, that, Rafiq Mansour has been the chargé d'affaires here for the U.S. Embassy for the last couple of years. And he and the team there have done a very good job under very difficult circumstances during the course of the last administration.
And Glenn, though, Glenn, you're right. I mean, yes, we have phenomenal career foreign service officers, but having a chargé who's, the acting ambassador and not a Senate confirmed ambassador who's presented his credentials to the leader of the country where he's at, to then have two people sitting on top of the embassy instead of just one, it makes a difference. And Dr. Ong is correct.
Yes.
We would be better off with ambassadors.
It sends a signal to the people, to the leaders in this country and any other country where the ambassadorial appointment is empty. You just don't care enough about us. And in the meantime, China is organizing, meetings with all the ASEAN foreign ministers in Chongqing and at the end of May.
Speaking of sending a signal, Dr. Ong, I'm reading here that President Biden should be visiting Japan and South Korea later this year. Could he not accommodate maybe one stop in Southeast Asia while he's there, Dr. Ong?
Yeah, probably Singapore or maybe Jakarta. I think those two would be good destinations. And I think Jakarta would be a good message to send. Head of ASEAN is there. The ASEAN Secretariat is there. And also to talk about issues to push forward with regards to the Myanmar agenda. I think that would be a very good signal. Yeah.
We're talking with Steve Okun, Senior Advisor at McClarty Associates, and Dr. Dr Kian Ming, Member of Parliament in Malaysia, member of the Pakatan Harapan Party. And Dr. Ong, let's move on to Myanmar. We have talked a lot about Myanmar on this show especially since February and the coup and ASEAN's response. Where is Malaysia right now in terms of its relationship and its dialogue with the government in Myanmar?
I think the foreign minister has been quite consistent in asking for the violence to stop. And our prime minister, even though he's not from my party or my coalition, has also gone to Jakarta to lend support to President Jokowi's position. I think the challenge now is not so much in Malaysia or Singapore's position. It's more to do with the intransigence of the Myanmarese junta.
Right.
And they are basically blocking the appointment of a special envoy from Indonesia to go there. So that again sends a very bad signal, and perhaps we have to consider more drastic situations within the context of ASEAN against Myanmar.
So what are those drastic measures? Because everyone's been talking about, hey, they should stop the violence, but really no one has done more than just kind of pay lip service to that.
Yeah, I think I need to go and read the articles of ASEAN again to see whether a temporary suspension of membership is possible. That could be one of the things to do if it was allowed under the articles of ASEAN.
Dr. Ong, what impacts, both politically and economically, is the Myanmar situation having on Malaysia?
In terms of directly on Malaysia, very little, but there are long-term challenges that Malaysia and perhaps Thailand would face, which is the issue of refugees, right? I think we are already facing that. We have a large Rohingya population here in Malaysia, and then then we have also a large Burmese working community here in Malaysia as well, and there can be challenges of clashes between these two groups.
Yeah,
it's pretty serious.
Lots going on. And Steve, have you heard anything else this past week from ASEAN on Myanmar? I have not seen anything myself, but have you seen anything in your perusing the news?
No, and there's a broader question for ASEAN, and it was more than 2 months ago where the ASEAN consensus said there shall be an immediate cessation of violence in Myanmar. Well, obviously it's gotten worse in the last 2 months. So ASEAN does have to make that inherent choice for itself. How strong is this association going to be? Is ASEAN going to be able to come together on the South China Sea? Is ASEAN going to be able to come together on other challenges that it has beyond, economic integration? And there are going to be implications beyond Myanmar if ASEAN doesn't live up to what it said it was going to do. And so far, it hasn't done that.
Yeah, and I think just want to add one point. I'm not sure whether this would disrupt any possible dialogue sessions or meetings with EU, for example. EU may decide, look, as long as Myanmar is on the table, it may be too noxious for us to come and talk to you guys. So you got to get your act together before we can talk to you, right?
Absolutely. And Steve, just finally, I'm reading reports that your former country, the United States, is awash with UFOs. What's going on?
We're not awash with UFOs. I think there were only about 150 or so they're not called UFOs anymore, Neil. Now they are now UAPs, which is unidentified aerial phenomenon. And so these are things that naval aviators, right? Naval aviators have seen these UAPs. They can't explain them. They said, it's not extraterrestrial. It could be plastic bags was one of the possibilities. It could be ice crystals. It could be, maybe it's something man-made from Russia or China. But I figured, I was going to ask you, I figured they would ask you maybe if you've been in communication with Loki and he was responsible.
Well, you never know, Steve. When I saw unidentified object, I just thought it was Glenn's wallet.
More like your wallet. Yours is the one we've seen that's crazy. But it is interesting because this Pentagon report has been highly anticipated now for weeks and weeks, and we just have a couple more minutes to talk before we got to run up to the top of the hour. But they've not been able to identify 143 of the 144 sightings, and some of these videos are quite compelling. Dr. Ong, has Malaysia seen? Have you heard of any reports of Malaysian pilots seeing any of these types of things, or what's your take on it?
I hope not, because then the issue of crystals would come up again, and it may be more damaging because the crystals may be in the plane and not outside.
Well, indeed. So we don't know. I mean, look, I think that the videos we've seen have been very compelling that were taken by the pilots in these military aircraft. Is it the Russians? Is it the Chinese? Are they U.S. Super secret weapons or fly? Who knows, right? Who knows? But
right, Glenn, maybe they're Infinity Stones. Right
there you go.
The truth is out there. The truth is
finally a reasonable explanation comes from Steve Okun. Gentlemen, we have to leave it there. Special thanks to Dr. Ong Kian Ming, Member of Parliament, Malaysia, and the Pakatan Harapan Party. We're so happy to have you, and hope you'll come back again and chat with us here on Weekend Mornings.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
And Steve, thanks to you as well.
Cheers, guys. Fantastic.
All right. Have a great day. So much going on in the world. All right. We got a lot more coming up here.
We do. I thoroughly enjoyed that. Thanks to Steve and Dr. Ong. That was absolutely terrific.
Wonderful.